keynoter, will be joining for the afternoon panel. Okay, that said, let me invite Mark Dixon to step up here. Mark Dixon, as you may have seen, is now one of the extraordinary people who is devoting his life, waking minutes and probably some sleeping minutes, to thinking and working on climate change. He started off in Silicon Valley, had a wake-up call. I don't know that he's told me what that particular moment was, but a wake-up call which led to a resolution on his part that said to him some version of, this is the only thing that counts. This is what I have to do for myself, for our world, for his family, for all of us. He's been an award-winning filmmaker. We're going to be seeing his film, Your Environmental Road Trip, during the lunch hour. So please plan to stay around for that. It's a wonderful and engaging film, as I mentioned. And I think that will get us started, Mark Dixon. So welcome to you. Thank you for being here with us.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me on this frosty morning. And I will share my screen and get rolling with the little slides. Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yeah.
Super. Okay. Well, hello. My name is Mark Dixon. Thank you for that thoughtful introduction, Bob, and thanks for having me here today. It's just it's a pleasure and an honor, and I do enjoy thinking deeply about a lot of these issues, and have for many, 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 many years. Probably not as many years as some of you on this video, but on this meeting, video meeting. But I will, I'll roll right in, and if you have questions that accumulate during the conversation, feel free to add them to the chat there. I may periodically, and then after the presentation, also add some links into the chat myself. So my name is Mark Dixon, and I've been exploring environmental challenges, particularly including the climate crisis, since about 2006. I've done this as a filmmaker, as an activist, as a husband, an uncle, and a human being. And today I'm going to share with you some reflections on how I understand the process the gravity of the situation that we find ourselves in. Looking back over the years that I've been at this, since roughly 2006, and frankly, not much at all before that. It was kind of a sudden shift for me in terms of really taking action. It seems that I've felt all the feels that I feel like are possible. I'm sure there are more to come, but in the making of the documentary, the Your documentary, and in the processing of it, you really have to, in order to do that work. I didn't do all the editing for Your, I didn't do most of it, but I've done a lot since then, and I still worked with a lot of that footage. It takes a lot of emotional energy to watch that stuff over and over and over and over and over and over and over again to make a documentary out of it. We'd probably watch each portion of that film, 50 times, and with decisions for each second. And so when there's a thought on screen, it's very deliberate, very intentional. So some of the emotions that I have felt, just to make it clear, are some, like shock, surprise, kind of like Greta as well. Some fear, some anger, significant frustration, even to horror. But there have also been moments of joy and delight, and certainly a growing and deep sense of purpose that all of this kind of pile of bad news has brought. And I want to say really clearly, firmly, that I don't think that there's any one way to process all of this. So I don't want to assert that this is the right way, that I just want to share how I've been going through it. All that said, I find that I regularly circle back around to the importance of staying grounded in the realities presented by the science of climate change, however troubling they may be. I try to just put myself into the wind of that news, that information, and be real about it. I also believe that the degree to which I am grounded in reality correlates with my ability to stay motivated to act to create positive change. It also improves my ability to actually make decisions rooted in that reality that will hopefully have a greater impact than if I wasn't actually paying attention to the reality. So that means, of course, staying informed about a lot of bad news, those realities. And it also means staying informed about all the good news too, the possibilities. And so I'm going to walk through that today with a little bit of storytelling to help the medicine go down, so we'll say. So this is basically a photo version of my original concept of success. And I don't know if any of you have seen a poster that I'm not showing here for copyright reasons, but there's a poster that has basically the purpose, something to the effect of the purpose of a higher education. And it has like it's a poster of like a house overlooking the water with a bunch of fancy cars in the garage. And that was kind of my vision of where I wanted my life to go when I was a young man. And I worked hard to do that. I have since learned that a lot of that hard work was piled on top of a whole lot of generational privilege, and that I can't just take credit. But eventually I did get into Stanford through piles of privilege, most likely, and then some work and some studies as well. And I went through college, got an industrial engineering degree, and worked in Silicon Valley for a few years. About 9 years in tech. But there were a couple of moments where things shifted. Okay, my audio is distorting just a little bit. I'm not sure. Can you hear me okay? Oh, I can maybe drop my audio just a little bit.
I'm hearing you okay, Mark.
Okay. Okay, I just dropped my audio just a little bit. Thank you. Thanks. So in the late about 1998, I think, this is just shortly after graduation, my brother, after a year-long road trip that he took around the world studying sustainable urban development, told me that everything I knew was wrong. And that was kind of a shock to the system. I wasn't really ready to hear that, but I kind of kept an open mind because I loved my brother and I wanted to be receptive to things that he might have to tell me. It wasn't really until I heard Al Gore give his Inconvenient Truth presentation live that I had kind of my big uh-oh moment. And that was in roughly 2005. And he asked a question as if posed by a grandchild, like, what did you do when you knew about climate change? And so I began to read more and more charts, and found that maybe my vision of the future was not maybe the best goal in life, and started encountering charts like this. And I realized also that maybe my retirement was going to take place, if I was ever going to retire, right about there. So, after the curves went vertical. And so we see a sort of planet in decline and pollution in an acceleration upwards. And one of the core pieces of pollution that was most evident for me in this time was climate change. I think it probably still is, but we're waking up to all kinds of other types of ecosystem disruption that are largely rooted in our pollution or our footprint. So that didn't bode well for what I wanted my fancy retirement to look like. And it's sort of, I felt that, and this was sort of getting at question number one, what were my reactions to this? And it's been a process, but initially there was a sense of sort of sadness and anger and betrayal. And like I've said before, sort of uncertainty. The context in which I lived my life had changed. And there was now a cloud over the future for myself and for humanity. And in fact, it seemed like for all living things. And so I was frustrated watching people work towards what seemed to me like a comfortable retirement when I felt like that wasn't anymore really a morally viable option for me. It didn't even feel like a morally viable option for them, especially considering the piles of oil carbon dioxide and oil, and CO2 emissions and pollution that was accumulated in order to make that retirement possible. And I'm talking about like everybody's retirement, my grandpa's retirement, any retirement that I would, pursue. It's like we built our retirement process around the necessity of digging out a whole bunch of fossil fuels as fast as we can, as we can, with all the money and education that we can, saving it up so that we can die with dignity. And that seems so wrong. It seems like so much overkill just to attempt to die with dignity. So I was disturbed by that. But it also sort of, all this information sort of really focused my energy towards trying to address this ecological crisis that ultimately embodies the climate crisis. I wanted to work against the odds for what I knew to be right, or what I felt to be right. I thought that there might be solutions, but I wasn't sure exactly where to find them. And so I couldn't help but start to feel a little bit like this young woman that I saw at a protest a few years ago. And the bad news kept on coming. And even to this day, literally this morning, I was looking at news that Greta Thunberg walked out of her panel discussion at the COP26, I think, that we're in now in Glasgow. And I just want to highlight a couple lines from a couple studies that have emerged to sort of set a little bit of the stage at the mindset that I've been in. These studies are recent, but these are things that I've been kind of aware of for anywhere from 5 to 10 years. So the first is from a science study in September 2021 called Intergenerational Inequities in Exposure to Climate Extremes. And the abstract highlights, under continued global warming, extreme events such as heat waves will continue to rise in frequency, intensity, duration, and spatial extent over the next decades. Younger generations are therefore expected to face more such events across their lifetimes compared with older generations. And this raises important issues of solidarity, fairness across generations that have fueled a surge of climate protests led by young people in recent years, and that underpin issues of intergenerational equity raised in recent climate litigation. And really that sense of intergenerational equity, and in my mind, it was intergenerational justice, was something that emerged for me right at the beginning in 2006, I think. I was at a workshop on environmental stuff and fundraising around that, and they really wanted to help you get to what are you in this for? And intergenerational justice emerged for me at that time of my life as sort of a foundational principle that I was working towards and that I was most motivated by. And then George Monbiot in The Guardian, I think I saw this article even just yesterday, referenced an article in Nature entitled Unextractable Fossil Fuels in a 1.5C World, which Monbiot characterized as follows: to stand a 50% chance of avoiding more than 1.5C of global heating, we need to retire 89% of proven coal reserves, 58% of oil reserves, and 59% of fossil methane or natural gas reserves. If we want better odds than 50-50, we'll need to leave almost all of them untouched. And yet, so that's the end of that assertion from George Monbiot. We're still going full steam ahead on building this new Shell ethane cracker. It's going to release over 2 million tons of CO2 per year. And John Stoltz, a professor of environmental microbiology at Duquesne, according to an article recently written in Yale Environment 360, he estimated that the cracker plant will need fracked gas from more than 1,000 new wells every 5 to 10 years. And so it flies in the face of the logic of the science of what we need to do to stay below 1.5C. It just seems absolutely absurd, if not totally depressing, and it's not fair, and it seems impossibly risky. It's anything but what many, what we like to think of as like conservative behavior. And I like to put it another way. This is a little drawing that my wife put together a few years back that I find is really valuable. I wonder if anybody can guess, what this is. I won't let you hang for too long. This is the 50% airlines. So this is an airline that we have decided to ride in to get to the solutions for climate change. If there's a 50% chance of success, is that an airline that you'd want to fly to its destination? And I would submit no. I would also submit that maybe we wouldn't want to put all of humanity, everybody we love and know and care about, both now and deep into the future, on the same airline with us. I would not. I would say that 50% is not nearly good enough for the stakes that we're facing right now. So you might think, okay, yeah, great, Mark, no future, thanks. And yeah, there's definitely some concerns that that we have about this. And in fact, on that, well, I'll get to the yurt trip in just a second, because I want to highlight that this is that young girl's brother standing right next to the sister, and he's got this beaming smile. And I've always kind of been mystified, like, what's going on through this kid's head? Maybe he doesn't realize, he's a little younger, maybe he doesn't realize, and I have no idea. I didn't ask the child what was going through their mind. I did ask their parents if I could, or the mother, I think, if I could photograph them, and it was fine. So I've been enjoyed using them in my presentations since then. But I feel like my story around this child, so I've made up entirely, is that it helps if you have a plan for your future, or at least some kind of pathway into working against the doom phase of climate awareness before you give up. And so maybe this child has been reading Yes Magazine, and that was a big influence for me. Still is, though I don't read it as much as I used to, but I still read it periodically. I find their articles are really powerful. It's the Journal of Positive Futures. And I went and kind of made a pilgrimage in a way to the writers and founders of Yes Magazine. They live up in Washington State. David Corton and a whole bunch of people around him have done some really incredible work at highlighting what are some really incredible solutions. And that magazine, among many other sources, helped me get a better perspective on all the solutions that are out there. But they weren't as nearly as popular. I had to do some digging to find these solutions. And so I figured that they were probably lots more solutions, and a lot of them were just as unknown as the ones that I was finding and loving in Yes Magazine. And so I wanted to find them and popularize them. And so that's the big reason why I started this yurt adventure, this road trip documentary project. I also wanted to, I felt like that climate change, the climate crisis, was a big enough deal that it was probably worth me doing a little extra research before I kind of redirected my entire life and career towards something that I had heard was maybe a good idea. And it's saying that, like, do your own research in this sort of highly polarized environment can maybe catch a few people the wrong way. But I really was interested in both doing my own research and also being very thorough about it, and also doing it in a way that I could make a big contribution. If it was the most important thing that we were hearing about from everybody, that it would make a big, unique contribution to the movement. And so that's sort of some of the factors that emerged in my mind as I was thinking about how I want to do this. So yeah, we went researching. And so it became this project where we traveled to all 50 states in the country over 1 year, 365 days, because we didn't want to take 10 years to do this research. We wanted to, we knew we had to kind of probably move fast. So my buddy Ben from college and his wife Julie, who Ben somehow managed to convince to upend their life in New York and travel around the country with me for a year and film all these people. We filmed like over 800 people on this road trip. And so you can imagine the sort of the schedule of interviews as we were traveling around the country. It was frenetic. And sometimes very stressful, but also so inspiring. And I learned so much from it. We ultimately searched the country far and wide for weird, wild, and wonderful solutions to our ecological challenges of the day. And I wanted to highlight also that we were sensitive to the idea that a lot of this news can be very depressing. And we were trying to figure out how can we deliver this information in a way that will be more receptive, that people will be more receptive to hear. And I even did a little focus group, using my little corporate background, did a focus group to see what, how people were taking this information. I presented all this stuff that was so compelling to me to a bunch of friends after giving them and enticing them with pizza. Said, come and listen to me give this little lecture, and then we'll have pizza and we'll talk about it. And basically I presented all this bad news, and a lot of them said, this just makes me want to kind of run and hide. I don't want to engage with the issues. I don't want to deal with them. And so that was really important for me, because I was motivated by all this bad news, but they were not. And I have learned since that a lot of people are not motivated by all the bad news. And so we designed Yurt very specifically to try to get through that sort of barrier by putting a whole lot of sugar with the medicine, and really trying to personalize it. So, we had us on screen. You'll see us in the film later today, playing with issues, playing with complex issues sometimes. And you're going to be seeing the 1 hour version of the film. You can watch the full 2 hour version of the film at our website at yurt.com if you want to get a deeper dose. And then there's like 50 short films that we also made. So you can just go deep down the rabbit hole of Yurt, but we try to all kind of base it in facts and reality, and make it fun at the same time. And so this is kind of, I wanted to touch on this screen. This is the road trip map that we had. We went all over. And I think this points me to the prompt, the conference prompt of our strengths and weaknesses. And so I want to talk about why I did yurt. Ultimately wanted to throw my weight on the pile, make that unique contribution. I had some savings for a house in grad school. My family had my back. I had this good education and was good with spreadsheets. I had a healthy body and a healthy mind. I didn't have children. And so that was kind of a unique aspect of what I might be able to contribute, because a lot of people who had children probably couldn't spend a year just traveling all around the country and talking to people on camera. I wasn't worried about what I looked like on camera. So that was very helpful, kind of shameless. I wasn't eager to be in front of the camera, but I also didn't care if I was, because I had a performing arts background. And I was good with some tech stuff. So we came up with this route and talked to all those 800 people in that 1 year. And I want to also highlight kind of a little bit of backstory here, that I had my first encounter with physically painful anxiety in my mid-20s, after the company that I had been working for in the 1990s laid me off while I was working for them in Japan. And as part of that process of healing, I explored meditation among a whole range of other kind of alternative healing practices. That's my brother helped me with that. He had all sorts of things, pointed me towards organic oatmeal and all kinds of other modalities. I had only dabbled with meditation up until that time. But in about 2006, I took a 10-day silent meditation retreat, and kind of had to get past in the first 4 or 5 days my foundational and existential anxiety, things like the fact that I'm eventually going to die, and stuff like that. It's not great to think about, but if you think about it for like 4 days in a row straight and nothing else, like you literally don't do anything else except just like meditate on emptiness and other sort of reflections. I felt that I could then sort of figure out and start to contemplate what might come next in my life with sort of a more level, open mind about it. And so I didn't really think up the road trip. I kind of just like put the ingredients of what I could do well into my brain and blended it with what I felt the world needed most into my brain, and then sort of deposited that into my conscious mind. And then I just sat there and waited for my subconscious mind to kind of stitch it all together. I didn't know that it would, but it started to do that. And out popped a rough concept for the road trip. And the rest is history, and pretty well documented with like 600 hours of camera footage. And I found that wildly, to my mind, as an industrial engineering major who was all about like efficiency and practicality and scheduling and all this kind of stuff, this sort of indirect way of solving problems has served me so well ever since then. I think of it a little bit like as a lazy way to solve problems, but I find it's much more effective. I get to much more creative and thoughtful solutions that save me countless hours of time than I would have spent if I was just trying to do it in a very conscientious, sort of deliberate way. I just let my subconscious mind work on the intractable problems, and it brings me ideas that I can't take credit for, but I'll use. So that's been a little tidbit there. This is my buddy Ben and his wife Julie here, and that sort of touches on the question in the conference of like, who can you partner with? And these are people who were part of my life, who were around me. I didn't know Julie very well, but I had known Ben through my college a cappella group, and then we got to know each other deeply over the project. One thing that I have found both in activism and in this project as well, a little backstory, a general tip that sort of came to mind, was that we really put the relationship first in this project. And that really was essential, that in doing any kind of activism or any kind of major project, if the relationships don't come first, then it's much more likely that you're going to atomize, you're going to like separate and pop apart and diminish your own power in that project. Because a lot of the times these things can get heated. Sometimes you might be under legal scrutiny. There are all sorts of conditions that come up that if your relationships are not strong, and that's if they're not the priority, then I think it greatly increases your chance of failure in whatever the challenging thing is that you're taking on, particularly including addressing climate change, which involves confronting perhaps the largest monolith of power and money all accumulated in the history of humankind. That's sort of I don't have a factual basis for that, but I can just imagine that if you put all the money made from all the oil into a room and then try to work against the power of that money from that oil, you would be up against one of the greatest accumulated powers in much of human history. And that is not something that you can necessarily take lightly or do without risk to yourself or to your legal circumstances, because that money likes that power, and it will try to maintain itself. One of the ways that we tried to break through and make it fun was creating little challenges along the way. And so this is our garbage on the road trip. We tried to restrict ourselves to 1 shoebox of garbage per month. So we ended up with just over 50 pounds of garbage, which is about 1/100th of the average American's garbage. And we started asking people questions like, this is from Wes Jackson. We started asking if he had a message for America, and this is what he had to say. So we could spend a whole lot of time just dissecting that singular quote, but it's in the film and we can talk about it in small groups, and I'm going to move on. And so let's see. Okay. There we go. Another person we talked to who had a profound influence on our project was Janine Benyus, and she highlights a detail that you'll see here. And that way that she coined the term biomimicry. And it's really fascinating once you start to dig into all the ways that nature solves all the different problems that we encounter in the world, in the physical space that we're in. You can do really amazing things if you get the oil out. And I feel like the oil is like the cheapest, dumbest way to solve all the problems, but the least creative, least fascinating, and very often it blocks us from seeing potential for solutions that are much more extraordinary. For instance, there is a little drone that I bought a few years back that's very small. It's like fits in the palm of your hand. And people fly it, and people often think that it's a really cool thing, this drone. And then I highlight that there's this other animal, this ruby-throated hummingbird that's similar size and weight, and actually can fly not just 5 minutes, but actually 22 hours at a time. It's like about 220 times the duration of a little drone. And so what we think is cool, I think we need to start to redefine the potential for transformative change by just looking to nature in some instances and seeing that we don't have, we're not able to make the coolness that is actually physically possible if we were just paying attention. So you don't have to get so super depressed about, oh, we just can't do it. We just can't do it. The solutions to all the things that we need to do are often just all around us. And in some ways that gives us the freedom to stop worrying about what's possible and to start doing what's absolutely necessary. I'm just charging here towards the end of my presentation, but people often ask, like, what are the things that I can do? And I hate to make it personal because I feel like it's a huge collective problem, but simplifying your life, getting more local in your life, and building community. And in many ways, community is a representation for, like, get organized. The amount of power that you have to affect change, I feel like, grows exponentially to the extent that you're organized as a community. And then don't just settle for incremental change, really look at system change. Very often the best solutions are not going to come from a little change here, and here in little steps. Sometimes we have to rethink the entire system and build from scratch, but take the time and the money to do that. And then we can see that we don't have to look at the issues that we're seeing in the climate crisis like this. We can flip that script and see that as we build up the ideas and as the crisis converges upon us, our incentives to, like, really dive in and come up with more and more amazing ideas grows, and these kind of grow exponentially. And the barriers to them, as we build economies of scale in these new directions, the barriers plummet because all of a sudden the right way to do things or a better way to do things becomes that much less expensive. This is one source of inspiration that I found at the COP21 back in 2015. This is a book called Drawdown, and there's a website, drawdown.org. It highlights the most powerful ways to address the climate crisis, kind of ranked with stats and models to back them up. There's even a new training course that they put on the website for free, endless documentation. They talk about onshore wind turbines, utility scale solar voltaics, reducing food waste, plant-rich diets, educating women, tropical forest restoration, improved cook stoves, refrigerant management. There's just countless ways to address this issue that can be applied in your personal life, that can be applied at a societal level, that can be applied in an institution. All these things are possible. And
Mark,
here's a another quote. Oh yeah, time.
No, you're doing fine. I hesitated to gong because you had just said that you were coming to the wind down. So I'm just saying this to sort of sink in with that. You've got another 2-3 minutes here if you want.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'll just use them up on a couple little videos and a couple little reflections. And that's Krista Tippett from On Being. Now, my mother is a pastor, a retired pastor, and she encouraged me to consider the spiritual side of environmentalism. And so we talked to people like Krista Tippett occasionally, and it was really an extraordinary time. And she had just had these words of wisdom for us. So a couple more thoughts. I like to think of the climate movement as an ecosystem. Different people and organizations will make different kinds of contributions. It doesn't make sense to ask a bird to carry a heavy load, but an ox will. And you probably wouldn't ask an ox to scout out 30 miles ahead and report back if you had a willing bird around. And so we have to think of our governments and our nonprofits and our community members and institutions, educational institutions in particular, and corporations and look at their strengths and weaknesses and see how we realistically leverage all of them to move smoothly in the right direction without crashing too much into each other. The other is mind the gap principle. And I'm going to drop a link in so you can ponder this. Oh, it's not going to let me. Okay, I'll probably put it in afterwards. I've written a whole blog article about this, but it's basically to like politicians often say, Mark, you're being unrealistic. We can't just make these cuts just this fast. It's just not possible. So I say, okay, mind the gap. Let's highlight what we can do. And then let's highlight where we know we need to go based on the science. And then let's focus all of society's attention towards that gap. And then work that gap with all the institutions we have available to us. Put the young people on it, old people, everybody, but mind that gap. If we don't highlight what that gap is, then we're not going to be able to address it with the pace that we need. I found that's a workaround to people telling you that we just can't move that fast. And then if we still have no idea how to get there, we can at least work to create a world in which we can imagine success. So lay the foundation. So think, okay, if we can't imagine it now, what do we need in place to be able to imagine getting to where we need to go? I have one more quote. This is David Orr. And so just have one kind of closing reflection now. And that I wanted to draw it back to the notion of mental health, that I found in my own experience that my mental health, especially as it relates to this issue, I find that it benefits when my thoughts and my actions are informed, not by the way that I think the world should be, but by the way the world actually is. And sometimes the most important work isn't fixing climate change. Sometimes the most important work is preparing ourselves emotionally to take on a challenge that is filled with so much danger and potential as the climate crisis. So thanks so much. I don't think that I have time for questions right now, but I think we're going to have time for questions later, and you can chat with me in the Zoom chat, and happy to play it by ear from this point out. Thank you so much for giving me a chance to share my story here and share some ideas on the topic. Appreciate it.
Mark, I appreciate this, and I thank you for all of us. That was just truly wonderful, great, invigorating, humbling, pretty inspiring, and really rich. I was making notes for this question or that question. We have one question which has been posted, and if you can do something with it in a minute, we can take a shot at it now. Otherwise, we can come back to it. John Kenstowitz asks, can you summarize where the movement of divestment from polluting companies is at? Is that something we could speak to just briefly here?
It keeps changing. I think I'm just checking in. Someone might know what the latest number is. I'm thinking it was like we're up into the maybe $14 trillion.
41.
41. Okay, Wikipedia is out of date hugely. Okay, thank you. $41 trillion. And I'm hearing stories that the divestment campaign is having significant impacts on the financials for a lot of major fossil fuel corporations. They're having more and more difficulty in financing their carbon intensive activities. It started very small. I think there was just one college, and Bill McKibben was was in league with the early efforts to start that divestment campaign as kind of a inspired by the divestment campaign around apartheid in South Africa. And they felt that this was really a potentially powerful way to show that civil society no longer accepts the status quo approach of fossil fuel companies to do work that by all scientific measure appears to be completely incompatible with a stable life on this planet. And when it started small, but it's grown now. And now some of the largest institutions in the world, I actually have a whole slide that I can pull up a little later or in a private conversation. I have had a slide that presented just like a list of all the institutions that have divested. And it's extraordinary. I encourage you to explore that. But major pension funds, religious institutions, like giant churches, massive pension funds, and even state funds for money have chosen to divest. Harvard even recently divested after a massive campaign. That was big news. I know that at one point Stanford gave a mixed message on divestment. They eventually kind of divested. I don't know if they're fully divested or headed that way, but once Harvard just says that we're going to divest, then the rest of the colleges so hopefully just fall into line. So that can be a whole other conversation. You can go on for hours and hours just about the divestment stories, but it's really been extraordinary. I remember visiting the original offices of 350.org just maybe a couple weeks or a month after it was originally founded. And we were talking with Bill McKibben for the Yurt documentary during the days when he was starting 350.org, and that has expanded. He's onto some other things now, but these things are happening in our time and they're having massive consequences, sometimes more slowly than we'd like, but they're definitely
it's great.
Definitely helping. Yeah. So
good question. Great answer. Thank you.